Chapter 3. The Earl and Countess of Yorkley will be well able to congratulate themselves on the success of their evening, Rose mused to herself during a break in the performances, while Elizabeth had taken herself off to check in with her mother. Rose had elected to remain behind, as she was enjoying her mother's good favour for once, and had not been commanded to similarly meet up during the intermission. Besides, the girls had managed to find excellent seats, and Rose wanted to guard them lest someone else decide to change seats. The milling guests were fascinating to watch. Having honed her powers of observation in Vienna, Rose was determined to keep up her skills. She found one could learn so much about a person by watching their interactions. She was gazing about, enjoying herself far more than she would have expected, when she overheard a snippet of conversation that made her feel as though the blood had frozen in her veins. "Have you managed to secure Wrentham yet?" Rose was quite sure she had heard that rough male voice before, but she could not place who it belonged to and dared not crane around to see who it was. The voice did not evoke anything good, and a shiver of dread went down her spine. The tone made her well aware that this conversation was not mere pleasantries, and the mention of the Duke had her ears on high alert. Rose's heart galloped in her chest. She was flooded with a tide of conflicting emotions. The familiar but unpleasant voice provoked fear and disgust in her breast, while mention of the Duke swept her with a maelstrom of anger and heat. She sat as still as a statue, but made every effort to ensure no trace of her thoughts were written upon her face. Rose hoped fervently that Elizabeth would not return and interrupt before she could figure out what was being discussed. "Not as yet. This type of plan takes time to bring to completion." "How long can it take to compromise the man?" the fast voice demanded harshly. "Your daughter is sufficiently taking. She isn't daft, is she?" "My daughter is a good girl," the man excused and explained, his voice whining. "She knows what is expected of her, and we'll have the thing tied up nicely very soon." "Well, see that she does. We need Wrentham for his access to certain quarters, as well you know." The two men must have realized this was not the appropriate venue for such a conversation, as they broke off anything further they might have said and moved away. Rose quickly turned her head to watch them retreat. The first voice she had finally placed, and if it were at all possible, her blood had actually grown colder as she realized who had spoken. But the second man, the one with the daughter, she was unfamiliar with. Rose was profoundly relieved to see Elizabeth returning. "Quickly, Elizabeth, as discreetly as possible, turn around and see if you can identify the short man walking toward the back of the room with the rather wild-looking hair, wearing the puce-coloured waistcoat." "Do you mean Lord Austen?" Elizabeth asked. "If I knew who I meant, I would not have asked," Rose answered with a waspish huff before apologizing. "Sorry, my dear. My ignorance offends me at times." "Never mind about that. Why did you want to know?" "I was merely curious about who he was. I was entertaining myself watching people while you were gone, and I was wondering how it was possible he managed to leave the house looking that way." The hastily made-up story did the trick, as Elizabeth tinkled with laughter. "The poor man! That particular shade would look perfectly lovely on someone else, I am sure, but certainly not him." Elizabeth paused for a moment in contemplation before continuing. "He is a widower. His wife died a couple of years ago. It is just him and his daughter. You might recall the Chadwick girls mentioned that they had called on Lady Anne to interrogate her. Ask her about dancing with the Duke." Rose was grateful Elizabeth was not looking at her while giving her that reminder, as she was certain her feelings were not well hidden, and she did not wish to be making up any more nonsensical explanations at the moment. Elizabeth was still speaking. "It would seem they are not terribly flush with funds. Perhaps the Viscount has turned off his valet. If I recall correctly, I overheard my father mentioning that Lord Austen had made some bad investments since his wife passed. I do believe Lady Anne is in town trying to make an advantageous match." With relief, Rose heard the next performance striking up, so no further conversation was possible at the moment. Her mind raced with all the complications. She really should hate the Duke, but she had never been able to bring herself to that point. They certainly were no longer friends. However, Not that far in the distant past, he was her very best friend. Did that not require a certain degree of loyalty? And then there was the matter of the other man, the one who seemed to be orchestrating the scheme against Alex. Sir Jason Broderick. Another shiver slithered down her back. It was not at all pleasant. Something really did need to be done about the conversation she overheard. But to whom could she turn? Her father would be blind to the implications because it involved Wrentham. No one else could be trusted with what she knew. Not that she knew very much, and she certainly didn't know very many people, so it was entirely possible she could trust someone else. Elizabeth's father, perhaps? Rose quickly dismissed that possibility as she continued to feign intense interest in the musicale. While the Earl had seemed perfectly kind when she had been introduced to him, she could not imagine herself confiding in the man. Lord Castleton was a pleasant but distant gentleman. She could not imagine him welcoming her confessions. In this particular case, the fact that someone was trying to entrap the Duke, Alex would be the best one to talk to. But if she spoke directly to Alex, he would want to know everything, and there were so many details she absolutely could not tell him. Things she knew about Broderick from her time in Vienna. Things the always correct Duke of Wrentham would not welcome hearing from her. Could she manage to brazen it out, telling him only about the attempt to catch him in the parson's mousetrap, and leave out the details about why and how she knew so much about the conspirator? Surely his wealth and position as Duke of Wrentham could be explained as reason enough. Rose sighed in resignation. It was not the best plan ever hatched, but it was the best she could come up with on her own. "Are you all right?" Elizabeth whispered at her side. "As right as rain," Rose answered with a grin. "That is a nonsensical expression, but you sighed just now. It made me concerned." "Did you not find that musical number to be as moving as I did?" Rose asked, managing to keep a straight face despite her friend's dubious expression. "Apparently not." Elizabeth's answer was dry before they were hushed back into silence by the other spectators. Once the musical portion of the evening was complete, Lady Yorkley announced that refreshments were being served in an adjoining room. The sound of many conversations swelled to fill the rooms, echoing slightly off the high, ornate ceiling. The crystals in the chandeliers shivered and tinkled with the vibrations. As the two friends made their way slowly to the other room to have a glass of punch, Rose intercepted Elizabeth's inquiring look. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "You seem different since the beginning of the musicale. I just cannot put my finger on what has changed." Elizabeth paused for a moment, gazing at her companion with her head cocked to the side. "You seem tense or on edge. Do you care to tell me about it?" Rose's lips parted as she thought of a plausible explanation for her distraction or tension. But then she quickly remembered that she had claimed to be moved by the music. Someone moved by the music would not be so quick to be on edge, was her frantic thought, as she tried to come up with something believable to say. Bringing order to her disordered thoughts, Rose forced her shoulders to relax as she turned her face more fully toward her friend, with a warm, brilliant smile. "How could I possibly be uptight at such an event as this?" she asked, before lowering her voice in conspiratorial tones. "Aside from the usual reasons of this being a ton event, of course," she muttered with a wink. "But did you not think those last couple of numbers were exquisite? I do believe we shall hear those musicians many times throughout this season, as they shall no doubt be in high demand to perform at other functions." Elizabeth did not look fully convinced, but accepted Rose's words with good grace. "I am sure you are correct. While I did not feel it to be the earth-shattering experience you seem to have found it, many of the performers did do remarkably well. We must find Lady Yorkley and express our appreciation." Rose pulled a face at her friend's words. "You, of either of us, should be eager to do so, since you enjoy the performances so very much." "Are you certain a note of appreciation would not be sufficient?" Rose asked plaintively. "Quite. Now hurry along if you have finished with your punch. Let us go and speak with her now. There does not seem to be much of a crowd surrounding her at the moment." Rose was mentally castigating herself for her choice of words, as she was strangely reluctant to approach the Countess. But in all reality she had enjoyed the musicale, and Elizabeth was correct. It was only right that they compliment their hostess in person. The society matron smiled in welcome as the girls approached her. Rose admired the deep teal of her beautiful gown. The embroidery on the soft cotton organdy caught the light and nearly shimmered. "Lady Yorkley, thank you so much for your generous hospitality this evening," Elizabeth began the conversation as they neared the Countess. Rose quickly chimed in. "The performances were exceptionally well done. You must have put a great deal of thought into choosing your performers." "Why, thank you, you dear girls," Lady Yorkley answered graciously. "I am so pleased that you are enjoying yourselves. I was not certain the younger ladies would enjoy a musical evening as much as a ball." "Balls are all fine and good, but a musicale is food for the soul," Rose enthused, much to Elizabeth's amusement. Rose had to work hard to control her own giggles as she saw her friend struggling to keep her face from breaking into a grin. Lady Yorkley regarded Rose with elevated eyebrows. "Are you being serious, young lady?" "Actually, I am. I think music is one of the most beautiful things that was ever invented." Rose had no struggle in fusing her voice with full sincerity, as she really did love all things musical. "Of course, at a ball you can enjoy the music too, but there are added complications that oftentimes interfere with the unadulterated pleasure of a well-performed piece." The Countess's smile increased in sincerity as Rose spoke. "How true that is, my dear Miss Smythe. I remember my first season. There were many distractions to contend with. But are you enjoying the season despite the complications, as you said?" "Oh, yes, of course." Rose stretched the truth a wee bit for the sake of tact. "Without the season, I would not have made the acquaintance of my dear friend, Lady Elizabeth, which would have been a sad thing indeed." The three well-bred ladies shared a smile over these words before their hostess inquired politely, "Have you two had a chance to have some refreshments and mingle with the other guests? There are no doubt some here that you have not yet met, Miss Smythe, as this is your first season. Would you like me to introduce you?" Despite her usual composure, Rose felt her cheeks beginning to blush with the pleasure of being thus singled out by the Countess. "That is exceedingly generous of you, my lady. I would not wish to impose." "No imposition at all. Now come along. I am quite certain I have invited some highly eligible young men that you absolutely must meet." With those words, Lady Yorkley set off across the room. With a wry, questioning look exchanged between them, Rose and Elizabeth set off in her wake. Rose wanted to turn away from following the Countess when she saw her heading toward a handsome young man who seemed engrossed in conversation. The other man had his back toward them, but Rose had a sinking feeling it was the man she had overheard earlier speaking to Lord Austen. She so did not want to talk to him. "Lord Edgecombe and Sir Broderick, I trust you are having an enjoyable evening," Lady Yorkley began, causing the two gentlemen to quickly turn and bow respectfully to their hostess. "My lady, we are having a marvellous time," enthused the handsome young lord as he bent over his hostess's hand, placing a gallant kiss on the back of her wrist. "Who are your lovely friends, my lady?" Rose barely suppressed her shudder at the sound of Sir Broderick's voice. She felt the slither all the way down to her toes. He put her in mind of the snake she had seen at a fair being held in Vienna. The romantic side of Rose had always considered that men with the title Sir should always be even more gentlemanly than other men of the ton, due to the origins of the knighthood. It seemed to Rose that Sir Jason Broderick had never been of the same mind. She managed to maintain her composure as the Countess performed the introductions. Lady Yorkley began with Lady Elizabeth, but as she introduced Rose to Sir Broderick, Rose could not help interrupting. "Sir Broderick and I are already acquainted. We attended a few of the same functions while we were both in residence in Vienna, while my father was occupied with the Congress." "Oh, how lovely!" Lady Yorkley replied, her tone correctly polite, although her bright eyes seemed to Rose to be looking right into a soul. Rose bolstered the sincerity of her smile as much as she was able. It became less difficult as she turned her attention to the conversation Elizabeth was having with Lord Edgecombe. She hoped fervently that the young Viscount was not involved in any nefarious plots with Sir Broderick. Rose could not bring herself to trust anyone she saw conversing with the slippery knight. "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, my lady," he was saying. "And you too, Miss Smythe. Are the two of you enjoying the season thus far?" "Oh, yes," Elizabeth answered promptly, while Rose merely smiled politely, neatly sidestepping the question. Not allowing her off the hook, his lordship probed a little deeper. "I heard you mention you had been in Vienna with your father. Does that mean this is your first season here in London?" "As a matter of fact, it is, my lord. It has been an interesting experience thus far, I must say." These words caused the Viscount to throw back his head and laugh. Rose was torn between embarrassment over the attention brought to their small group and appreciation of his grasp of her subtle humour. She was relieved when he turned to Elizabeth and questioned her. "Tell me, my lady, have you found the season to be interesting as well?" "Infinitely more so, now that I have the enjoyment of the presence of my new friend, Miss Smythe," she replied, staunchly loyal, unsure if the Viscount was making fun of Rose or not. As though he were feeling like he was being ignored, Sir Broderick took this opportunity to enter the conversation. "Have the two of you ladies been friends for long? I did not think Miss Smythe had been long returned to Britain's fair shores." Rose stiffened slightly at the implication that he was aware of her whereabouts, but managed not to verbalize her reaction, leaving Elizabeth to answer the question directed at her however she wished. "In some ways it feels as though we have been friends forever, but you are quite correct. Our acquaintance is not of a terribly long standing." Elizabeth either picked up on her friend's discomfort or took the night into dislike on her own account. Rose could see that her usually sunny smile was noticeably dimmed as she turned it upon Sir Broderick. "Did you enjoy Vienna, my lord? Miss Smythe has been regaling me with amusing tales of her time spent there." Rose was grateful that the knight had never become aware of any of her involvements in the Congress, as he turned and gave Rose a look bordering on pity as he replied to Elizabeth's question. "The ladies, of course, enjoyed the fairer aspects of life in that fine city, while we gentlemen saw to the actual work of the Congress. Much of the time I was in Vienna, I was far too busy to enjoy what the city had to offer." "What a shame," Elizabeth answered briefly before turning her attention back to Lord Edgecombe. "Have you ever visited Vienna? I must admit I am a little envious of my friend, as I have really been nowhere." Rose nearly rolled her eyes as the young Viscount hastened to reassure Elizabeth. "But, my lady, that is not the case. You have been to London, and really that is all that matters. It is true that I have seen a little more of the world than you, having made the grand tour with my tutor after I finished school. But there is nowhere finer than our fair country, and the greatest city in the world is our very own London." Lady Yorkley had remained with the small group during this exchange, and she stepped into the conversation at this point. "Your patriotic loyalty is to be commended, my lord. It is a shame the Prince is not here to hear your words. He would, no doubt, be heartened by them. Now, if you gentlemen will excuse us, I would like to bear off my friends to introduce them to a few of my other guests." With those words, the Countess swept Elizabeth and Rose off with her. After they were out of earshot, she paused briefly to comment to the girls in a tone low enough not to be overheard by the other guests. She kept a poised smile on her face, so no one would be able to guess what they were discussing. "I apologize, my dears. I had not noticed that Sir Broderick was in company with Lord Edgecombe. Otherwise, I would not have directed you there for the introduction. While I think the Viscount is a sweet, charming boy, I cannot quite bring myself to like Sir Broderick, and would recommend that you be wary if you ever find yourselves in his company. He is an associate of my husband, which is how he ended up on my guest list this evening. I would normally not be so indiscreet as to tell you of my true feelings in a matter such as this, but I have decided that I like the two of you, and thus needed to plant the warning in your ear." Rose decided then and there that she quite liked the lovely Countess. "Have no fear, my lady. You can be sure that neither of us will bandy about your words. And I had already come to my own conclusions about Jason Broderick long ago. You can count on the both of us to be cautious if we find ourselves in association with him in the future." Dropping into a respectful curtsy, Rose continued. "We appreciate your kindness in taking the time to perform some introductions, and for having a care about us, but we truly have no wish to monopolize your time, my lady." Glancing around with shrewd eyes, Rose concluded, "You have already done us a world of good just by singling us out in such a way, but we should really allow you to get back to the rest of your guests." With a trill of pleasant laughter, the Countess grasped Rose's hand in a warm clasp. "You are a dear minx. I shall enjoy furthering our acquaintance in the coming weeks. You really must call upon me at my next at-home, which is 2 days hence. You are probably quite correct that the rest of my guests will not be overly appreciative if I spend too much time with any one guest. So I shall see you back to your mother's." Lady Yorkley took a moment to greet Lady Smythe before she hurried away to speak with others. "What a perfectly lovely lady she seems to be," Rose's mother commented a moment after the Countess left them. "How kind of her to take some time to see to your introductions. You should cultivate the connection if possible, my dear. It could do you well. To be sure, you need all the help you can get as the awkward daughter of a mere baron." Rose intercepted Elizabeth's sympathetic look and felt the heat rising in her cheeks. Despite her heightened colour, Rose kept her face impassive. She excused herself from her mother's side with a few choice words. "Elizabeth and I had been on our way to check out the refreshments when we encountered the Countess. With your permission, we will return there for a few moments." "Very well, my dear, but see that you do not stray too far. We should be taking our leave before too long." The two girls strolled away. When they were out of earshot, they shared a brief giggle. "Oh, my dear, I should not laugh as it really is at your expense, but your mother is just terrible at times. Laughter is the best way to handle her, but never with her around, of course." The two girls shared another giggle over this, before Rose continued. "In her defence, she has faced many disappointments in life, and it has moulded her into the lady you now see. It is unfortunate that I did not make my debut before my brother's death. She was a much different person back then. Of course, I was much too young then, but you know what I mean." "Indeed I do. Now, let us go and see if there are any of those scrumptious-looking pastries left that I had spied earlier." As the two girls sampled the treats and enjoyed another glass of the punch, they made small talk with some of their fellow guests for a few moments before being left on their own again. "Do you plan to take Lady Yorkley up on her invitation to call on her?" Elizabeth asked with curiosity. "I do believe the invitation was directed at the both of us." "Perhaps, but it seemed to me that she took to you much more strongly than to me. And as your mother so kindly pointed out, you need the connection much more than I do." Rose grinned at her friend's words. "How true it is." She paused in thought for a moment before continuing. "I quite enjoyed making her acquaintance, so I actually do plan on accepting her invitation. It did seem to be quite sincere. Do say you will accompany me." "I believe that wild horses could not keep me away," came Elizabeth's prompt reply. "Oh dear, it would seem our time is up. I see your mother bearing down upon us. Shall I call upon you tomorrow? I would think it is my turn." The girls shared one more grin before Rose was borne away by her mother. As they rode home in their carriage a while later, Lady Smythe took her daughter to task. "You really should be making more of an effort to further your acquaintance with gentlemen, rather than always being in company with your friend, Lady Elizabeth. In fact, I saw Lady Yorkley introduced you to that attractive Sir Broderick, but you hardly exchanged a few words with him. What is the matter with you, girl?" Rose just barely managed to keep her jaw from dropping open at her mother's words. How could the older woman possibly find the terrible night to be the remotest bit attractive, she wondered. Keeping her thoughts to herself, as was her wont of late with her mother, Rose used her mother's own reasoning upon her. "But, my lady, Elizabeth is an earl's daughter," she explained. "Would you not agree that it is a marvellous connection for me to cultivate? In her company, I am much more likely to make the acquaintance of a more eligible parti than Sir Broderick." "Well, I can't see the wisdom in your words, but you cannot expect to look too far above your station. As the daughter of a mere baron, you are rather insignificant in our world, and you would do well to bear that in mind." "Yes, mother," Rose answered meekly, while feeling torn between amusement and pain at her mother's words. She was relieved when they pulled up in front of their townhouse. Rose dithered in the foyer after saying good night to her mother, waiting as Lady Smythe glided up the stairs silently. "Is my father home, Hartley?" she asked of the butler. "Yes, miss. He is in his study working," Hartley answered, smiling fondly at his young mistress. "I am certain he would not mind being disturbed by his favourite daughter." "I am his only daughter," Rose answered dryly before inquiring. "Has he been working long? Do you think he is due for an interruption?" "He has been in his study all evening. He is more than due, miss, although I must say I am certain he would always welcome your company." Rose appreciated the faithful old servant's loyal affection, and accepted his words with a grateful smile as she headed off down the hall to scratch on her father's door. "Enter," came Lord Smythe's quick response. Rose entered the comfortable space with a sniff of enjoyment. She always loved the smell of her father's study, a combination of wood, spice, and old spirits. She was not sure how it was achieved, but this was the only room in the house with that particular scent, and it always felt like home to her whenever she could spend time there. "Good evening, my darling daughter. Did you have a good time?" He welcomed her warmly before trailing off for a moment. "Forgive me, my dear. I seem to have forgotten where your mother told me the two of you were going this evening." "That is quite all right, Papa. I am sure you had plenty of other, more important things on your mind." "Your mother assures me that all this season business is as important, or even more so, than what I am occupied with." Rose sighed. "My mother does not appreciate that without the work you, and others like you, do, there would be no season. There is nothing more important than that. The season is a bunch of social nonsense, to be perfectly frank." "We can both agree that social nonsense played a key role in our work in Vienna." Grinning, Rose answered, "That is very true, but sadly we are no longer in Vienna, and here the balls and such are just for socializing from what I can see. And husband hunting, of course." "Well, that is very serious, important work, is it not, my dear?" Rose merely shrugged at this before turning the subject reluctantly. "Sir Jason Broderick was at the musicale tonight." Her father's face tightened with this news. "Did you talk with him?" "Very briefly. It could not be avoided." "You be sure to steer clear of him in the future." "I will, Papa. You can rest easy on that score. I have absolutely no desire to pursue the acquaintance." She paused for a moment, wondering once more if she could talk to her father about what she had overheard. Deciding to keep it to herself for the moment, she tackled a different, but still uncomfortable, side to the subject. "Mother will disagree with us if she becomes aware of our thoughts on the matter." "Whatever do you mean?" "In the carriage ride on the way home tonight, she admonished me for keeping my conversation so short with him. She thinks I cannot look any higher than a knight in my social aspirations, and she thinks he would be a handsome choice for my husband." The Baron was a very self-controlled man, a quality that served him well as a diplomat, but these words caused him to come very close to losing his composure. Taking a deep, calming breath, Lord Smythe smiled sadly, but kindly, at his beloved only daughter. "Your mother means well, I am sure, but you must remember that she has been through a great ordeal in the past few years, and cannot be held accountable for any strange things she may say. She loves you dearly, you know. I know, Papa, but sometimes she has a strange way of showing it. Rosebud, my darling, you know your Papa loves you, do you not? Yes, Papa. Rose smiled through the mist that filled her eyes over her father's endearment. And you do trust my judgment, do you not? But of course! While Rose was aghast at the thought that he might doubt it, a niggle of unease did creep into her conscience at the thought that she was keeping something from him, out of concern for his lack of judgment with regards to the Duke of Wrentham. Pushing the thought from her mind, she looked at her father expectantly. Your mother is a good woman, and has been an excellent mother, but her own judgment is slightly askew at the moment. I am uncomfortable speaking ill of her, so we shall not delve any deeper into this topic. Suffice it to say that you have my complete trust, and I would ask that you use your own good judgment as best you can over the coming weeks. And if you have need of discussing anything with someone, you may come to me at any time. You have quite proven your dependability and soundness of mind many times over when we were in Vienna. The information you were able to dig up was invaluable. Thank you, Papa. I just find that life is rather dull now that we are back in England, and everything about this season just seems so trivial. Everyone gossips all day, and the only thing they seem to be concerned about is the latest fashions or who said what to whom. It is rather grievous after the excitement of life in Vienna. Is there not something I could be doing to help you here? Oh, no, my darling. You did quite enough to help out in Vienna. You must just apply yourself to the task of finding a sensible spouse, so that you can set up your own household. It is well past time for that, I would say. We would have seen about it much earlier if not for our mourning. Rose was saddened at this reminder, and felt a pall fall further over her night. Bolstering her spirits by sheer force of will, she set herself to cheering her father. In my mind, it is just as well that I have not come up for the season prior to this. I feel that I am in a much better position to make a sound decision after having a little bit of experience under my belt, as you would put it, and I would not have wished to miss the time we spent in Vienna. It was something I will remember for the rest of my life. In fact, I have half a mind to find myself a diplomat to marry, so that I could follow him about and help him with his work, as I did you. I am not so certain that would be a sound choice for you. But take your time and look about at your options. You should be a good girl and settle down to a normal life. I would not want my daughter to be involved with espionage on a regular basis. Rose could see that her father was ready to have an end to the conversation. While he had been perfectly happy accepting her help when it was convenient, he was not about to countenance her entry into the profession. That, in a nutshell, was why she could not settle into the rhythm of the season. She wanted so much more out of her life, she thought with a sad twist of her heart. Rising from her position in the wing-backed chair in front of her father's desk, Rose took another deep sniff of the much-loved scent, wishing she could somehow transfer that restful, comforting smell to some other room in the house, such as her own sitting room or bedroom. Then she could enjoy it at her leisure. With a resigned sigh over her own silliness, she bade her father a fond good night and made her way upstairs to her bed. It would be some time before she could relax into sleep, as she had many things on her mind to mull over. Her mother's odd behaviour was a matter of some concern, as was her own ambivalence toward the search for her husband. But uppermost on her mind was the conversation she had overheard at the musicale between Lord Austen and Sir Broderick. Who could I possibly confide in about this? She asked her own reflection as she brushed out her hair, having dismissed the maid. Lady Yorkley was very kind this evening, and even seemed to be inviting me to enter into her inner circle. I feel as though I could confide in her about certain things. Rose gazed at herself with a wrinkled brow. For instance, I could discuss my marital options with her, or perhaps even ask her opinion about Mamma's strangely conflicting behaviour. But I do not see how I could discuss this situation with her. There were highly confidential matters at stake, possibly even matters pertaining to the security of the government, or even the prince. Besides that, there was the matter of a young woman's reputation, and the Duke's future happiness being in jeopardy. Rose's reflection turned sadly pensive at this. Alex's happiness was none of her concern. Their families had quite clearly declared a feud. She ought to loathe him. No doubt he loathed her, but she still could not bring herself to hate her old friend, and she really could not stand by and do nothing about what she had heard. For the time being, until she could figure out with whom to speak about the bigger issue, or find out more details so that it would be a manageable project to pass to her father, she needed to protect the Duke from getting caught in a trap set by Sir Jason Broderick. That duplicitous weasel would not get his teeth and claws into her old friend if she had anything to say on the matter. Once she had the Duke of Rentham out of the equation, then surely she would be able to pass the situation over to Papa. Thus resolved, Rose set herself to pondering just how to manage protecting the Duke from the Austens' clutches. The Alex she knew hated any sort of subterfuge, so she would just have to come right out and tell him. At least, she had to tell him what she had overheard. It would no doubt be best to leave out the details regarding how very unscrupulous Sir Broderick was. He would want to know how she knew, and the entire issue would get murky. Or even murkier than it already was, she reminded herself, as she gazed at her reflection. She remembered the moment where her eyes had locked onto his. Her stomach clenched at the memory. He truly was a remarkably handsome specimen of a man. But not for her, she reminded herself once more. He was a Rentham, after all. She pulled her thoughts back to the matter at hand. Now all she had to do was figure out a way to have a conversation with the Duke of Rentham, without anyone finding out, especially her parents. Really, any one of the Ton should be kept in the dark about any conversation she might have with the Duke, as it could lead to all sorts of speculation. And if she became the subject of speculation, it was sure to reach Mamma's ears at some point, and she could just imagine the scene that would ensue if Mamma were to find out she had spoken with anyone from the House of Rentham. It would have to be a public place, but perhaps at an ungodly early hour. That would be just the thing. She would make the arrangements tomorrow. Glancing at the mantel clock, Rose shrugged with reflection. Later on this morning, to be more precise, she thought with a slight grin. Her grin widened when she realized that she had been brushing her hair all through her mental wrestling. That must be at least a week's worth of brushing. Perhaps I can take the next few nights off of this wearisome task.